So just to continue on from my last video, right? This is another MP's page. This is just a random one. I haven't picked this for any reason. This is Sarah Owen. She's an MP for North Luton. I didn't choose it because it's Tom Robinson. I just happened to be on this page. I'm going through the different MP's pages because I'm emailing them all, right? And I just happened to get to this page and my memory card filled up, so I had to stop and wait. And then I thought, she's got on this page that I was talking about in the last video with all these social media contacts, right? I said in the other video that I noted that the last MP that I used for an example didn't have the constituency office details underneath their profile. So this is just an example of one that does, right? So she's actually got a address for the office and the separate phone number for the office, although she's got the same email. She's using the same email. This is a Labour MP, and sometimes some of them have got another email for casework. Look, appointment only, but you can leave telephone messages with these people. But these are the issues here, right? So some more things that I want to say about this compared to the other video. You have to know the election law, really. If you need to study and read the election law and also the reasons behind it and why, and also there's a good House of Lords debate that goes into great detail about it. And so the whole basis of Nigel Farage using GB News and Talking Pints, boosting his popularity, but paid for by private means, all the studios and everything, and then he ended up winning. And someone could have challenged that in an election petition in the 2024 general election. But who's got the £5,000 which deposit you need? And people hadn't been learning the law, and I'd only just been learning the law and studying it, right? And I hadn't learned enough at that point anyway. And even now, if some of the others are still getting boosts and benefits and popularity on the back of that, really. And I can't even afford to challenge the new by-elections that are going on, or any of the local council elections. So it's an argument with the Electoral Commission. And I'm also arguing it with the Scottish Parliament. And then they were saying that I hadn't already pursued it when I had, and they rejected that petition. And I've got a petition to Parliament now, and we're not getting these published, so we're being obstructed. When it was in Parliament's remit in the first place anyway. And it doesn't have to be one seat, it can be the general principle. The election court's only if you contest one seat. But anyway, this is really important here. They're actually putting the branding and logos in for the contact. And I explained that you don't do that with a telephone number. It's just a number. It doesn't say it's BT or anything like that, right? But, so, going back to, like, Nick Clegg. When Nick Clegg was for Hallam, the MP, he's getting all these advertising benefits from a private local radio show, right? Commercial radio. And no one challenged him from getting an election boost from that. They could have done. But then he went on to be Deputy Prime Minister. And then he actually ended up working for Facebook when Lord Allen of Hallam had worked for Facebook as well. Now, at that point, MPs are using adverts on there, and I think that they're making use of overseas equipment, and it's getting interventions and effects and influence from people in other countries putting comments on there. And the policy of those platforms as well is a foreign policy. Now, this is the thing. Those foreign policies, that Section 230 American law, it's not English law. So it doesn't apply in England, but that's the law that they're using to take down political content in England, right? And election material. David Davis MP had a video taken down, for example, right? And the acts of law which you need to use and can use in an election, you're not allowed to use because their American policy doesn't allow it, right? And their Section 230 gives them a right to take it down in America, but not England. Now, the Online Safety Act's just come into effect, and there's an exemption for legally privileged material, right? But the Americans still aren't letting us allow it in his own country, even though they're applying that law. They're not applying the exemption because they're Section 230. They're intervening with it, even though that it doesn't apply in England, right? Now, this is the thing. The idea of the policy, okay, the whole idea of the policy of these platforms is that it's not just American law in America. It's actually, they're making up their own rules and they're getting people to consent and agree to them, which extend further than the actual law. So it's like the platforms are getting to make up their own laws, which no one votes for, and then forcing everyone to consent to them when it's actually beyond the law of the country, right? So it's beyond the law, right? Now, when they do that in other countries and then enforce that policy in other countries, it's actually enforcing law beyond the law in other countries that isn't even the law of other countries. So it's this introduction of a policy-based way of doing things. And the only way that they can enforce it is by getting us to agree, consent, and accept, right? Agree, consent, accept. It's not like we didn't vote for it. You know, the police don't go around and enforce it. The platforms enforce it because they've got the buttons and they've got the administrative tools, right? And then they're also getting us into taking on the behaviour of these policies all around the world. Like, you know, in these Facebook, don't talk about tennis when you're in a football group, or don't talk about, you know, darts when you're, you know, in a group about, you know, art or something, telling you what you can and can't talk about. And then getting these administrative people to actually enforce that on their groups. It's like having a guru, and he tells people, if you're around at John's house, right, you know, John says that you don't talk about tennis when you're around at his house, or you know things like that. Is ridiculous social effects and very authoritarian. It's encouraging an authoritarian way of managing groups and people, right? Not like an altruistic, beyond any kind of chairman and meeting laws that you could ever have. Like the Public Meetings Act says that you can transact information in a meeting, right? You're allowed to, and the basis of these policies is that you can't, right? You're not allowed to transact. You can be removed or restricted. So it's against the Public Meetings Act, the principle of it. It's like introducing an army, right? An unofficial army, and then giving everyone the equipment, tools and buttons, but online, to keep everyone in this regimented sort of way of doing things, which is really wrong, I think, and immoral. But anyway, and I think the government, firstly, they're not allowed to use it for elections. They're not supposed to. I think it's against the election laws, but they did. And not only that, they're using it for Parliament, right? So they're mixing Parliament law with election law, which is two separate areas of law, right? While you know there's by-elections going on and things like that, when there's not a general election on, right? They're leaving the material up there, right? And using it for Parliament, which advertises them. And then these are advertising the actual company. It's not just like a phone number. So like the email address. Okay, so maybe the email address says like @gmail.com in the address, right? But or Outlook, but it's not necessarily putting a logo or brand. It is consequential, but the consequential effects of going on to these kind of like, you know, when you've got a phone number, even if you're on EE, or it doesn't matter whether you're on EE or not, or whether you're on, you know, whether you're on Orange mobiles, or whether you're on whatever company you're on, when you give someone the phone number, it's just a number, right? And it doesn't actually promote the company. You get the number transferred. Now, this is sort of like what Sergey Brin's doing with email addresses. Not email addresses, sorry, with URLs, internet addresses. Sergey Brin's doing that with internet addresses now, so you can't actually see the address, so it just says everything is Google. So he's actually, every time you share a link now with your smartphone, it says it's a Google link. So he's actually, it's worse than this. Rather than having your phone number transferred, right? Rather than having your phone number transferred, so it's just a number, it doesn't say like what company you're with, right? Sergey Brin's doing it the other way around. He's like transferring everything onto Google, so he's converting every single thing into a Google advertisement, right? And he's saying that he's doing us a favour because he's shortening it like a short URL, which is convenient if you're struck for characters or space, but you can't see what it is till you actually go there, right? And it's inconvenient when you glance at it or look at it because you don't know what it is. So I think he's doing it for a strategic Google. He's not doing it just to shorten an URL, because he could have done it so it doesn't say Google. He said, hey, what I'll do is I'll give myself gratuitous self-promotion over the whole world and continue to... He wants Google on absolutely everything. You know, all the books are getting scanned and they're all getting Google embedded on them, right? I think that there's a psychotic obsession with his brand and company going on there. It's not normal behaviour. No one in this, I don't think anyone in the history of Earth has wanted their company or logo to be put on every single document in history, and every single address turned into their name, right? It's not normal. Not when most people are using it, right? But the way that I see this is this. The government could have legislated and intervened earlier on, right, with Nick Clegg, but the government had been planning the digital ID and they wanted to do it slowly and eventually. And they wanted to get everyone on Facebook because they told the BBC to tell everyone about Facebook and go on there and make profiles and get their stuff on there. And they started putting these social media things on here when they're not even supposed to be using it really for their political campaigns. They're meant to have their own websites, right? And now it's even commercially advertising these companies and giving them free promotion. It's just not like a telephone number, right? And what is the legislation for that? For profit, you know? It's a difference between parliamentary privilege and the Parliamentary Papers Act, which is for things that aren't privileged because they're for profit. But there's never ever been any certificates used. Apparently people just use the Act itself, but people still don't use it. We're meant to be able to use that Act, right? And I don't know what's wrong with the focusing on my phone. It's only happened recently since I upgraded. It seems that every time I upgrade it, there's some sort of new glitch with it when the new systems they put on there. But this is the thing. What I don't like about this is this, and this is the main important part of it all. All these platforms have got these policies which overreach and overstep the law, and they all get us to consent, submit, accept, right? Even breaching parliamentary law and election law, right? Now, the Parliament is heavily promoting and advertising these for the main contact methods, but they're already acting illegally in England and unlawfully and have been since around 2005. And they've been getting everyone to obey by these new policy rules which affects the behaviour of the country, right? But Parliament are advocating it on the website by having them on and using them, right? And really, it's actually welcoming and encouraging that type of policy for everyone to obey. Now, that's a type of policy that they're using in e-petitions, right? But when they formed e-petitions, it said you could disagree with the government and criticise the government, but they're not letting you, right? And that team who are checking them are rejecting absolutely everything. And they're even saying they don't understand you, right? You have the right to understand or be understood. So even the government have adopted this style of policy where you don't get to argue with the other party. They won't engage with you. They put this stupid form where you can put an appeal in, but we know that humans don't check those appeals anyway, right? And a lot of the times they're wrong and they don't really want to, you can't really get to speak to anyone properly. And unless you actually go on social media, you can sort of talk to them a little bit, Team Google, but it's not very clear communication, limited. And the whole time, you know, Nick Clegg was going, oh, you know, these tech people are racing ahead and, you know, they don't want to wait. But that's not true. Actually, it was all strategically planned. Cameron and Tony Blair and the whole lot, the government have planned it. They've helped them. They used the BBC to help promote Facebook, right? And they didn't do anything about that Section 230 overreach, even with their own campaigns or anything. They allowed it. It wasn't what they've actually done is they have been running elections illegally for the last 10 years, I think, since 2005-ish, right? And they didn't legislate. And they wanted to welcome in all these policies and consent, submit, accept, which are overreaching law, and changing social attitudes. And they've even put it on their website, and they're even promoting them. So, and then they're wanting to tie it into the digital ID. So they've been working with Google very closely, and that means that Nick Clegg's a liar, because he said that, we don't really have out to do with tech companies and they're racing ahead, and, it's all rushing too fast and we can't keep up with them. But the actual truth of the matter is, Nick Clegg's like, I was Deputy Prime Minister of England, and because of that, I've landed a job with Facebook, and I'm the global president, right? So they haven't, what they did is, the digital platform companies are the plan, are the strategy that they wanted to put in and not legislate. Because if they did legislate, they wouldn't have been able to use them. Well, they're not meant to have been using them. They didn't even legislate, so they could use them. If they would have legislated straight away so that, the privileges were meant to be enforced on there, then the policy wouldn't have been applying here at all. Anyway, not for political things, right? And they're still not helping us. They're still not getting enforcement here anyway, right? And now, you don't just have a phone number, which could be any phone company, right, transferred. They're actually, Parliament's turned into this is commercial advertising, right? Every single MP on every single contact page is commercially advertising these companies. And their policy and belief system, they're supporting their policies and belief systems. And these policies and belief systems, they're not even running their election campaigns lawfully on those social media sites, right? So, and this whole Starmer digital ID thing, which it needs on the mobile phones and a lot of this technology, is, they need it and want it to be able to do their plan. So, they actually have acted criminally and illegally with the Americans on purpose, right? In order to put a new global standard around the whole world. It's the e-petitions actually is like the top of the pyramid, because that's how we're meant to get these problems sorted out. But the rejected e-petitions is it's probably even worse than these platforms, right? The policy that they've introduced and that they've been using on e-petitions, the team have been over-enforcing the policy, just like Section 230 overreaches UK law, right? When you actually read the invention of e-petitions, it was meant to be modernised and relaxed, right? The relaxed rules of petitions, just like the 1832 Select Committee report, when it was more relaxed, before Erskine May wrote his book in 1844, right? Erskine May made the rules stricter by advice. It actually didn't lawfully make them stricter. He advised them on being stricter, right? When in 1832, people were using very strong language, right? Now, what the reality of e-petitions is that they're enforcing way beyond their policy, right? And they're throwing automatic replies and responses in that aren't correct to what they say they're doing, like allowing you to disagree with them and so forth, right? And they're not even being clear with you. They're saying that it could have been a number of things, but we're not telling you which one. And they've been told not to communicate with us when the e-petitions policy says that it's there to communicate. So what e-petitions has become is the absolute, complete, most undemocratic process that you could ever have. But Tony Blair made out that, he's opening electronic petitions and that he wants to make it democratic. But that's a lie. It's all a front. It's all a kind of charade to make it appear and look like they're being more democratic when in fact they're not, right? They're blocking half of it, particularly when we use it to criticise them on things that they're doing wrong or they haven't done right. And remember, since 1967 or whenever the Ombudsman was created, they took all the malpractice complaints of departments of government So Parliament didn't have to deal with those. Well, the MP signs it and then it gets sent off to basically the Ombudsman's there to deal with half of the complaints, but some of the complaints are actually about Parliament and the House of Commons and MPs, right? Because the Ombudsman can't deal with those because they're privileged to Parliament only. And that is actually what e-petitions is supposed to be able to deal with those. It means that our MPs are democratically accountable because they're not going to be accountable to the police or the courts, because they can't be judged in any place out of Parliament for parliamentary things. So you've got to have it judged in Parliament, which is why you use e-petitions. But MPs just think that they're immune from everything. They're only immune from it being heard in a court, right? Because it's to be heard in Parliament, even if they're acting with malpractice. But the Ombudsman doesn't deal with that with MPs. They deal with that malpractice of, like, the HM Revenue or, Department of Culture and Sport or DVLA. How do you deal with MPs' malpractice? Well, you're meant to petition the House of Commons about it, but they're blocking it and saying that it doesn't exist or you can't use it for that when you can. So they don't want to be democratically accountable. Yet, they've opened up their accountability to the police when they're actually supposed to have actually more protection from the police while they're serving, right? And it wait until certain times in between. And they're stripping that down. So MPs are becoming... they've completely and totally blocked the MP's direct accountability to us by complaining to Parliament. And instead, they've made them even more accountable to the police, right, during Parliament, which is completely and totally wrong. They shouldn't have done that. They're meant to be protected from the police while they're elected until we decide that we don't want them to be elected anymore, right? And we are policing them. This is the thing. And this is the thing which the police don't like. The police get used to using their uniforms and equipment and training and jobs to enforce the law. But what they don't realise is that when you pick up a political right, you are policing the law itself, policing what the law is going to be. And when these groups of protesters come together, they become the police. And this is what the police can't get their head around. They don't like the fact that there's this law and right you can take up where effectively the police cannot act on you. And the police are walking around with their uniforms on and their equipment going, well, we're the police. We'll say, you're the police when normal citizens are breaking the law in crimes and offences in private crimes. But when we pick up this right, we are becoming the police of the government, right? We're actually policing the government itself. And we don't need training or equipment, right? And this is the thing that the police can't get their head around, because they've got into this power and authority belief system just because they've got a uniform on and a job, but they don't realise that they're only there because we were supposed to elect them and put them in place to do the job, and then when we don't want the job, if they're not doing their job properly, or if we want the laws what their job's doing changed, we can do that, and we become the police. And this is what we're supposed to be using e-petitions for in Parliament, but we're getting obstructed and blocked because all of our interactions and behaviour now is controlled by these platforms, and they're advertising the platforms on the website commercially, and they're endorsing all the policy and ideology behind it, which is what they're wanting to implement in through the digital ID and so forth. And for us to be able to act and intervene in this and take steering of it or control of it, we need to use e-petitions. But e-petitions makes all these authoritarian platforms that have got overreach look like Tea Party, right? When it's meant to be actually the most democratic thing that you could do, right? But it's not being. And you can disagree with the government, or you can even disagree with the professor. If the e-petitions team fact check something, right, and then they say, "Oh no, you're wrong on that," well, this is the thing when Andrew Bridgen's saying, "Oh, I made a mistake in I didn't make any mistakes in Parliament, but if you do, you've got to go back and change it all," right? I am actually pointing out things that they've done wrong and said and done wrong, and they're trying to obstruct us from doing it. And if you can't disagree with the government and bring evidence against that, but the e-petitions team are acting like the judges, as if they're the elected MPs on the committee, right? And you've got a right to get the public to, what happens if Parliament, right, say that, this professor says this or that, and they fact-checked it, and we say, no, the professor's wrong, and all of England sign it, every citizen in England signs it and says that professor's wrong, then that's a considerable challenge, but we're not being allowed to collect the signatures on there, right? Or present the opposite view. And then Parliament are meant to debate whether or not every single person in England who signed a petition is right or the professor is, right? And it's a very strong challenge. They're not letting you put that on paper and getting the signatures to do it. They're saying 4 people are checking the professor's document and saying, like, you know, he's right, you're wrong. But that means that we're not allowed to disagree with the professor or the government, right? This is the thing. So we're actually being obstructed.